Well, when once-in-a-century floods swept through New South Wales, thousands of people were evacuated. But for the beehives left behind, the floods were devastating.
And since then, prolonged rainfall has been creating even more problems for beekeepers. And to tell us more, we're joined now by bee farmer Di McQueen-Richardson, who's from Honeybee Hives in the Clarence Valley region of New South Wales. Di, thanks for joining us and thanks for dressing up in your Sunday best this morning.
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you for having us on this morning.
Well, what happened to your bees when the floods hit in New South Wales?
Unfortunately, we lost a lot of bees. They were directly hit by floodwaters in most instances. We also had others that they just weren't able to get out and forage. We actually had 2 floods in the space of about a month. And so 4 weeks of the bees not being able to leave their hives to go out foraging and collect their nectar and pollen meant that they needed to use up their honey stores from inside the hive. And so once that's depleted, then they have no more stores. And so a lot of the hives actually starved, and others were then weakened to a point where the opportunistic small hive beetle and ants came in and took over and then also decimated the hive. So in total, we lost about 120 hives, but that number is still rising, unfortunately.
Wow, that's so devastating for you and obviously for the bees and for your business. But what impact do the beetles and the ants have on those hives?
Well, really devastating. The small hive beetle was accidentally introduced into Australia through import, and it is opportunistic, and it generally comes into a hive that is weakened. And what it does is the larvae that the beetles actually lay their eggs in the comb, and the larvae actually has some yeast on it, which makes the honey ferment, and then it basically turns the comb and honey to slush. And the technical term for that is a slime out. And when you've got a slime out in a hive, it's devastating. The smell is horrendous, and all the bees inside either take off and look for a home elsewhere, or they die. And it's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking when you open up a hive and see that the hive has been slimed out.
I can imagine, and I imagine you're not the only one experiencing this in New South Wales, these issues.
Absolutely not. It's very widespread. As far as we know, there's been at least 6,000 hives lost in this area. And the effects aren't just for beekeepers, it sort of has a domino effect where the beekeepers that have lost their bees aren't able to then provide pollination services to farmers, which means that the farmers aren't getting the increased crops that they would normally get from pollinated crops. And then that in turn increases the price of fruit and vegetables, as supply is weakened. So it's a long-term ramifications of something that lasted, a very short amount of time, but was absolutely devastating.
Yeah. Now, Di, I can see behind you there are some hives, and there's also a person wandering around behind you. Who is that person, and what is he doing?
Yes, that's my husband, Scott Richardson, and he is actually feeding the bees. So because the bees lost all of their honey stores during the floods, they actually don't have any honey going forward into winter. And normally we would make sure that they had lots of honey to survive the winter where they don't come out of the hives to forage. But unfortunately that's not the case at the moment. They had to use up all those honey stores while they were in the floods. And so Scott's effectively having to feed them twice a day. And so what that consists of is some sugar syrup. He mixes up a mixture of white sugar and water. And we also add some bee super greens to that to make sure they're nice and healthy. And then we also feed them pollen and a pollen substitute, which is basically a multivitamin. It's full of protein and all the amino acids and vitamins and minerals that bees need to thrive. So it's essentially giving them what they would have gotten if they had been out foraging for themselves.
Sounds like they're being well cared for. How many bees are you trying to keep alive here?
We currently have probably about 50 hives. We would have liked to have had a lot more than that. As I said, we lost about 120. And we're hoping that the ones we have, we're able to keep alive, because some of them are still very, very weak. They do seem to be improving, but it's a wait and see game. Sometimes they just lose strength and just can't recover from it, and it can take a month or two for it to, for the effects to actually really be felt. So.
And if those bees do survive, and certainly we hope that they do, what's the process of getting back to where you were before and multiplying the hives that you have?
Yeah, so what we actually do is we actually supply bees to other beekeepers, so to enthusiasts wanting to get into beekeeping and other commercial beekeepers. So that's one side of our business. And generally we would have gone into winter with, like I said, a lot more hives ready to go in spring. But this time round, it's going to take us a wee bit longer to actually get going. We have to wait till spring for the mating season to begin. And what we effectively do is then we make sure the hives are really, really strong. We build them up to a point where they're able to be split. And we produce queens, and we put a new queen into a split, put half the frames in one with the old queen and half the frames in another with the new queen, and then we have a new hive. But then we have to build that one up to the same sort of strength. And so we're effectively probably about 4 months behind where we will be starting from, if that makes sense. You know, we won't have hives ready to sell in September, October. We're more likely looking at, probably early next year. If the weather conditions continue to remain favourable for us for now.
And we really hope that's the case. And we wish you all the best for the next 4 months as you try to get back on your feet. And thanks to you, Di, for joining us, and also to Scott in the background as well. He seems like he's doing a great job.
Much.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Happy Mother's Day.
And to you too.
Thank you.
Yeah.